Jubilee is an opportunity to give thanks for the long reign of Elizabeth II. But what is it about our Queen and her reign that we most want to give thanks for? And if you've heard people talking about that, then I guess, like me, you've heard one thing in particular most commonly mentioned as the thing we want to give thanks for: her sense of duty and her willingness to serve other people. I'm imagining that to be the Queen of the United Kingdom, plus 14 other Commonwealth realms, must come with some temptation to want everything to be organised and to revolve around your own needs. But the Queen seems to have consistently resisted that. How has she managed to serve selflessly? And also, why is that a quality that we would find admirable in a ruler? As a contrast, Alexander the Great was just 20 when he became ruler of Macedonia in 336 BC. For the next 13 years, he led the Macedonian army on an incredible military campaign of conquest, capturing the whole of the Persian Empire at the time and adopting for himself the title King of Kings. Alexander the Great was a classical hero, a ruthless warrior king with a huge ego. And he was admired in his day, and he would still be a hero today in some cultures. So why is it that in our country we're perhaps no longer impressed with leaders who are self-serving and domineering and ruthless? Why are we glad that our Queen has not been like that? And I suggest to you it's because our nation has been deeply influenced by one man. And our Queen knows who that man is, and she's been very willing to name him on many occasions. So, for example, in a Christmas broadcast in 2008, she said, "I hope that, like me, you will be comforted by the example of Jesus of Nazareth, who often, in circumstances of great adversity, managed to live an outgoing, unselfish, and sacrificial life. He makes it clear that genuine human happiness and satisfaction lie more in giving than receiving, more in serving than in being served." And whether most people in our country think about it or not, I suggest that it is the influence of Jesus on our nation's life and our nation's thought that has given us an admiration for a Queen who serves other people. Our Queen serves others because she is a disciple of the servant king. So as we look at this passage, we're going to think about those two things. First of all, about Jesus as the servant king. If you've got it open in front of you, just look again at verse 17. Matthew 20, verse 17. "Now, as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside and said to them, 'We're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will turn him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified. On the third day, he will be raised to life.'" Everywhere that Jesus went in those last 3 years, the years of his public ministry, he was followed by large crowds of people who thought that he was going to be the answer to their problems. Wasn't this the leader who was going to get rid of the oppressive Roman rulers with their armies and their tax collectors? Wasn't this the teacher with authority who could get society back on the rails again, sort out the greed and the selfish behavior that spoiled the world? Wasn't this the healer who could deal with the diseases and the disabilities that wrecked people's lives and left families grieving? And here, Jesus is heading for the capital city, Jerusalem. Surely now is the time when he's going to live up to everyone's hopes. And because of that expectation, I think it's why this would have been a big shock to the disciples to hear these words of Jesus, telling them that he's going to Jerusalem and his time is running out. The betrayers and the murderers are waiting for him. It's clear that Jesus knows exactly what is going to happen to him. He could turn around and walk away from Jerusalem, but he doesn't do that because it's actually exactly what he's come for. He's not interested in being served by others. He's willing to give up the glory and the comfort and the protection and the hero worship that great men usually expect, because this greatest of all men tells us that he came to serve. He came to die. You might say, well, how's that serving anyone? What good is that? Jesus, if you want to serve us, then do something useful. We need people like you around in the world. What's the use of your death? And the way Jesus explains it, if you go to the last verse that we read, verse 28, is this. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man, that's his title for himself, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. A ransom comes into play when someone is held captive, and they can only be freed by a payment being made. So that could be a prisoner in war, and in Jesus' day, it might have been someone who'd become so poor that they'd ended up as a slave to their debtor. They needed a friend or a relative to buy their freedom, to pay the ransom so that they could be free again. And Jesus is saying that he will give his life as a ransom for many. His death will set many free. Now, if Jesus is saying that we humans need to be set free, then he's also saying something which we may find unpalatable, that we are in slavery. And to be honest, most people don't feel that way about their lives. The big problem is that you and I, by our nature, we turn our back on God and we want to do things our way. And the Bible has a word for that, it calls it sin. In explaining sin to children, people very often use two different illustrations or ways of doing that. One is just to notice the letter that's in the middle of the word. It's the letter I. And that's what sin is, putting ourselves in the middle, in the center, instead of other people and instead of God. The other way that people do it is just to take the three letters, S-I-N, shove off God, I'm in charge, not you. That's the basic attitude that we have, and it wrecks the world, it wrecks our relationships with other people, it wrecks our relationship with God. And if nothing is done about the situation, God will one day have to respond with justice. And that will mean overthrowing my impudent challenge to his right to rule. And nothing can be done, certainly not by me. I can't change my rebellious heart. And I can't pay the debt that I owe for living as a rebel against God. So you and I, we are like slaves in the ancient world who belong to someone else. We're trapped and we can't buy our own freedom. That's why Jesus says that he must serve us. He must ransom your life and my life. Sadly, sometimes people can read the Bible or come to church for years and still not quite get this, still think that what you're being told is that you've got to be good enough for God, that you have to sort out the problem. Whereas what Jesus is saying is, no, you and I, we're helpless slaves to sin, and he must serve us, he must free you. And you and I, we must trust him. We must begin to trust him, or we must go on trusting him to do what we cannot do. He is the servant king. He gives his life to rescue your life. But secondly, he makes it very clear in this passage that disciples of the servant king must also be servants. It's not just Jesus who's a servant. If you're going to be his disciple, you need to be a servant too. And that includes kings and queens who are disciples of Jesus. Have a look at verse 21. So James and John, who are the sons of Zebedee, come with their mother to ask a favor of Jesus. And Jesus says, verse 21, "What is it you want?" She, their mother, said, "Grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom." "You don't know what you're asking," Jesus said to them. "Can you drink the cup I am going to drink?" "We can," they answered. Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father." So James and John and their mother, they believe that Jesus will very soon be crowned as king, and he will receive the glory that has been long promised. And that's great. And they obviously believe that Jesus is going to need a right-hand man and a left-hand man to help him rule over the world. And who else would be better qualified to fill those posts than these two loyal disciples? To be honest, I'm not sure why they come to Jesus with their mother rather than just going on their own. But there we are. It's quite clear, isn't it, that the request is from them and not just from a pushy mum. But they come with this request, and basically what they're asking for, verse 21, is that they want to share fully in the glory of Jesus' kingdom. And Jesus' response in verse 22 is, "You don't know what kind of glory is involved." Sharing in my glory means drinking the cup of suffering and the cup of judgment that I'm about to drink. To share in my glory, says Jesus, would mean being baptized or drenched in the rejection and humiliation and the pain and the death that's going to be poured out on me. And he says, well, yes, you will share in this, but I think for now you don't really know what you're asking. You think that being at my right or my left simply means having a place of privilege and power and prestige. But that's not the way it's going to be, not to begin with. Are you ready to be crucified with me, one on my right and one on my left? Are they the positions that you're perhaps looking for? And I think James and John really don't know exactly who it is they're following or where he's going and what he's leading them to. And of course, it's not just them, because when the 10 hear about this, verse 24, it becomes clear that they would quite like those places at Jesus' side for themselves. That's why they're so indignant about it. And so Jesus calls the 12 together, verse 25, to teach them yet again what it means to be a disciple of the servant king. It means being a servant to the other disciples. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So a great revolutionary might leave behind an army of disciplined soldiers. A great guru might leave behind a school of well-trained teachers, but a great servant, like Jesus, leaves behind people who are ready to give up their lives for each other. That's what church leaders ought to be like. We're shepherds and overseers, yes, but not for our sake. If we're truly serving Christ, we would be serving the church. And that's what church members need to be like. And isn't that what you are doing when you are, you're not here just thinking about yourself, but you're looking out for new people, or over coffee you're wanting to encourage somebody else, or you're thinking about visiting someone who's not well or down. Isn't that what you're doing if you offer to lead a meeting or to read the Bible, or to lead in prayer, or to serve the coffee, or adjust the sound, or clean the church, whatever it is? That's service of each other, isn't it? And isn't that what you're doing when you sit at home quietly and you're praying for someone else? Or when you're not ashamed of Jesus as you talk to your neighbor? And it's not just Jesus and not just the members of the church, it includes kings and queens and prime ministers and presidents and anyone else in authority. If they're going to be disciples of Jesus, then they must serve as Jesus did, laying down their lives for others. Some of you will recognize this book, which was produced for the Queen's 90th birthday, 6 years ago now. And probably a number of you have got this because we had copies at the time. There are some more copies that I've got hold of, and they're on the table at the back, just near the big Bible. And you're welcome to have them. We're not allowed to sell them, so you can have them. If you want to put a donation, if you haven't made a donation to the repair of the vestry, you can do that if you want. But please, feel free to pick one up. Although I'd say if you're going to take one, make good use of it. Read it, lend it to someone else, put it on a coffee table for people to come into your house, whatever, because it is really very good. It's called The Servant Queen and the King She Serves, and the Queen herself wrote the foreword to this book. And I just want to read to you a little bit in here that's about the Queen's coronation. It's about a particular part of the Queen's coronation. This little section is headed up, The Secret Ceremony. There was only one moment in the ceremony back in 1953, one moment that was not televised. It was considered too sacred to show. As Handel's anthem, Zadok the Priest, is sung, the symbols of the Queen's status are removed. The crimson velvet robe, the diamond diadem, and the coronation necklace. And then there she is in a simple white dress. She looks like a bride, young, beautiful, delicate, except that the dress is far less elaborate than her wedding gown. There is a ring, but there is no groom. Elizabeth is not giving herself to a husband, but to a people. At that point, the Archbishop anoints her with holy oil and pours it onto her hands, her chest, and her head to show that she is being set apart to serve and love her people in all her actions, with all her heart, and with all her mind. In that commitment, she follows the example of Christ, who was also anointed. And of course, the word Christ means the anointed one. That's what it means. She follows the example of Christ, who was also anointed and set apart, not to be served, but to serve. And in his case, to sacrifice his life so that we can have life that lasts forever. The royal biographer William Shawcross says about that it was the most solemn and important moment of her entire life. Jesus, the greatest man who ever lived, came to serve. He is the servant king. Why does our Queen serve others? And why do we think that's a good thing, an admirable thing? Well, our Queen serves others because she is a disciple of the servant king. And if you want to be truly great, you also must serve others in Jesus' name. Shall we pray together?